All right, writers, we are at part 3 of 4 of this workshop. So we are scooting right along. In this part 3 of how to write an essay that doesn't suck, we are going to talk about how to transform your writing from boring to exciting. Now, I'm not saying your writing is boring, but I am saying that there is a way to write that is less boring than other ways to write. So we are going to talk about that. It's the concept of show, don't tell. And then we are also going to talk about how to structure your story so that you can build a journey through your story that flows for the reader. So that's what we're going to get to, and I will see you on the other side. So the way we make our writing not boring is to show, not tell. This means showing the reader exactly what happened, how the people looked, what the environment was like, rather than merely telling them. So the idea is to transform basic facts about yourself and what you went through into vivid, engaging scenes, much like a movie, using your 5 senses and specific examples. So we're going to talk about how to bring your 5 senses into the story you're telling. So we have senses for a reason, right? They help us understand our world, and it's the same thing when we're writing. When we're writing, we also need to connect our reader to what we were experiencing through our 5 senses. So I'm going to go over this in more detail in the next panel, but basically we're going to cover how you communicate what you see or what you saw during your experience, whatever the story is that you're writing about, what you heard, what the textures were or the temperatures or anything that you felt against your skin. Was it clammy? Was it sweaty? And then anything that you ate or drank that you recall during your experience. So like I said, we're going to go into more detail in just a minute, but this is what is going to make your writing come alive, I promise. So writing from all of your senses is what makes your story not boring. I want you to think about the story you are planning to write. Think about when you were going through whatever the thing was, what did you see? What colors, what shapes, what lighting, what was around you? Were there dogs? Were there other people? Were there other cars? What did you see? What did you hear? Was there any background noise? Were there voices or barking? What did you smell? Were there any scents that take you back to that moment? Did you smell gasoline? Did you smell something baking? Did you smell the smell of yeast rolls coming from the school cafeteria? What kind of textures were there? What was the temperature? Was it cold or hot outside? Did you feel something against your skin? And lastly, was there anything you ate or drank? Anything you ate or drank that takes you back to that time that you can pull us in by talking about it? Okay, so I'm going to give you some examples of showing and telling for each of the 5 senses. And remember, our goal is to show, not tell. All right, so for each of the 5 senses, I'm going to give you a couple of examples of telling, which is what we don't want to do, and showing, which is what we do want to do. Okay? All right, so let's start with sight. I saw the sun setting. That's how I would tell it in my story if I were the kind of writer who was just telling. But if I'm the kind of writer who's going to show it, I might write something like, streaks of gold and pink spilled across the sky, the sun sliding lower until it kissed the tops of the trees. Big difference, right? Okay, how about this one? I saw my friend was nervous. That's how you would tell us. Here's how you would show the same thing. My friend tapped a quick rhythm on the floor, his eyes darting to the door every few seconds. Here's another one. I saw the room was messy. Let's not do that. Let's do this instead. Clothes clung to the backs of chairs, papers blanketed the desk, and a half-empty soda can teetered from the windowsill. Much better, right? That brings the reader into the scene so they can actually see what you saw. Okay, let's move to hearing. Jake heard the dog barking. Okay, well, that's not really all that interesting. How about this? A sharp staccato yelp rattled the quiet, each bark bouncing off the houses like a bouncing ball. Much better, right? We get a much better idea of what's happening. I heard the rain. Okay, well, that's you telling us you heard the rain. Here's how you could show us that same thing. Fat drops drummed against the roof, a steady, hollow rhythm that grew faster with every minute. I heard laughter. Okay, so you've just told us that you heard laughter. How about show us that you heard laughter by saying something like, giggles spilled from the corner table, tumbling over each other like a pile of puppies. All right, that's a little over the top, but you see what I'm getting at. Okay, let's talk about smell. I smelled fresh bread. Okay, now show us by saying, warm, yeasty air drifted from the kitchen, wrapping around me like a soft blanket. Gosh, I get a much better idea of what you're smelling when you say it like that. How about this? I smelled smoke. Okay. How about you say it like this instead? A thin, bitter scent curled into my nose and made my throat scratchy. I smelled flowers. All right, well, that's not very interesting. How about this instead? The sweet, powdery perfume of lilacs swirled through the garden path. Well, that's a lot more interesting, isn't it? And that really brings your reader into the scene much better. Let's talk about touching or feeling. Let's say you want to get across the idea that your hands were cold and clammy. Well, you could say my hands were cold and clammy. Or you could say my fingers felt stiff, my skin prickling as if tiny needles were pressing into it. Let's say you want to describe the bark of a tree. I felt the rough bark. Well, that's not all that interesting, is it? How about this? The tree's trunk scraped my palms, the ridges catching against my skin like tiny cliffs. Wow, I can really feel that tree myself when you write it like that. I felt the hot sand on my feet. Okay, but how about this? Grains of sand stung the soles of my feet, the heat pulsing through them with every step I took. Much better, much more interesting. And then let's just talk about taste. How about this? The lemonade was sour. Well, yeah, lemonade is sour, but how about if you show us instead what it's like to drink sour lemonade? You might say something like, the first sip made my lips pucker and my eyes water, the tangy citrus bursting across my tongue. Now, you don't have to be so flowery with your language, but it's a lot more interesting to write it like that, right, than to just say, oh, the lemonade was sour. I mean, we can all go, yeah, okay, lemonade is sour, I get it. But when you really show us what it's like to drink sour lemonade, it puts us in your story like a movie scene might bring us into the story. The same with if you were to say the chocolate was sweet. Okay, well, chocolate does tend to be sweet. But what if you said instead, silky chocolate melted over my tongue, leaving a trail of sugar and cocoa warmth? That's a whole lot more interesting to me anyway. The soup was spicy. How about instead of just saying the soup was spicy, you say something like, a wave of heat rushed over my tongue, making my eyes blink and my forehead bead with sweat. Okay, so are you kind of getting the idea of what I mean when I'm saying show, don't tell? Don't just tell us what you saw. Don't just tell us what you heard or what you smelled. Tell us what it was like to see that. Tell us what it looked like to you. Tell us what it felt like to you. Those are the things that are going to bring your reader into your story and make them feel like they are experiencing it right along with you. And when that happens, they can't put your story down. And that's what we're going for. Okay? All right. Okay, I know that was a whole lot, but I really want you to get it. And if you would like to practice this, then just stop the video right here and do this practice exercise where you try rewriting the following to show rather than tell. So I want to talk just a little bit about point of view in a personal essay. Basically, point of view is the lens through which your reader is going to experience your story based on how you choose to tell it. So, in general, when we write a personal essay or a story about ourselves, we write in first person, right? We write it as I did this, I did that, or you can even write it in present tense. I do this, I do that, like I walk into school for the first day and find that I'm very nervous. So that's one way that you could write it. That's first person and that's in present tense. But right now I'm just talking about writing in first person. So when you use the I did this, I did that, it creates a certain amount of intimacy and authenticity for your reader, because your reader feels like you are talking directly to them. Okay, so that's instead of saying she walked into school and felt nervous. When we say I walked into school and felt nervous, it feels like we're having a conversation with our reader, and that's very engaging for the reader. So that's a great way to write, to think about writing your essay. I know we talked about this in the first part of the workshop. We talked about why it matters, talking about you can't just tell what happened, you have to talk about why it matters. So another way of saying that, and I'm sorry to go over this again, I'm going to say it a little differently, but it's super important, so I really want you to have it in your bones. It is the difference between your reflective self and your experiencing self. So what this means is that your story actually has two layers. And basically what I said before was it has the here's what happened, and then it has the here's why it mattered. Another way of saying that is here's the experience I had, and then here's my reflection on it. In other words, now that I'm looking back on the experience I had, I'm here to tell you what I learned from it, or what I took from it, or how I changed. It's the balancing of those two things, writing about your experience and then writing your reflection on that experience, that is going to give your personal story depth. So the other thing that is up to you as the writer of your own story is choosing your perspective, what perspective you want to tell the story from, and what angle you want to tell the story from. So you could write the very same story in a number of different ways. So you might write about your first day of school, like of high school, let's say, as a funny coming of age mishap, where, maybe your experience is you walked into school your first day and you tripped over the threshold and fell on your face or something like that. And that you could write that as funny, sort of looking back on it and almost making fun of yourself a little bit for the benefit of your reader, if you're able to laugh at it. Another way you could tell that exact same story, if you chose to, is as a painful lesson you learned. Maybe when you walked into high school that first day, you were wearing platform shoes you never should have been wearing, and your mom told you you didn't have enough experience wearing them or something like that. And so when you tripped over the threshold and you fell on your face, And everybody laughed at you. It was a very painful lesson to learn the hard way. And so looking back on it, you would talk about in your story how sometimes it's good to listen to your elders or whatever. Sometimes it's good. Sometimes your parents actually do know what's best for you. And that's what you learned from it. You could write it from the point of view of a cultural critique. Let's take the very same story. You wore these platform shoes. I don't know why I'm stuck on these platform shoes, but I am. You wore these platform shoes to your first day of high school, and you tripped over the threshold and you fell on your face. And maybe you look at that in terms of the culture. If you're female and these were high-heeled shoes that you really needed more experience walking in, maybe this is a commentary on what's expected of women. Why are women expected to put themselves on these towering high heels or in these platform shoes, that arguably aren't as comfortable or as easy to walk in as, other shoes, but that's kind of what the culture dictates in some situations. That they should look nice, and they have to look nice by wearing these crazy shoes. And so you could write this whole story as a critique of a culture that makes these demands on women. So those are three different perspectives, three different angles from which you could tell the same story. As a coming of age, funny story, funny mishap story, as a painful lesson learned, or as a cultural critique. So the other thing I want to say, and I also covered this in the first one, I'm gonna say this again. Remember, I said you have to always tell the truth. You can't make stuff up. Reliability and honesty in your personal essay is what is going to bring the reader into your story as well. When readers read a personal story, they are reading for your truth. They want to know exactly what happened to you. They want you to be honest. They want you to show your flaws. They want you to show your doubts. And they want you to show your contradictions. You're not writing a personal story to put yourself in an amazing light so that your reader comes away and goes, wow, what an amazing person. They're so perfect. No, you're writing a story, whatever it is, because you had an experience that meant something to you. And it meant something to you as a fully functioning human being who has flaws, who has doubts about themselves, who often acts in contradictory ways. And so the strength of your story is going to lie in your willingness to be candid and vulnerable for your reader. Believe me, your reader will so appreciate your vulnerability that will pull them even deeper into your story and make them appreciate what you're writing about, and it will help them to relate to it. So in short, point of view in your personal essay is your unique voice, how you shape the story and the meaning you make out of it.
So real quickly, I just wanted to go over this before we leave it. You're going to tell your personal story in first person. Most personal essays are written that way. You're drawing from your own experiences. So using I did this, I did that, makes your reader feel like you're confiding in them. You are going to alternate between telling about your experience and reflecting on it. Experience and reflection are two sides of the same coin. The experiencing self lived through the event. The reflective self is you looking back on it, making sense of what happened. You get to choose how you tell your story, from what perspective and angle. Was it a funny coming of age mishap? Was it a painful lesson learned? Was it a cultural critique? Your point of view determines which details you highlight and how your reader understands your experience. And then lastly, reliability and honesty. In a personal essay, readers want your truths, your flaws, your doubts, your contradictions. The strength of your story lies in your willingness to be candid and vulnerable.
Writers, we have come to the end of part 3. Congratulations. we have covered a lot in this section. So we talked about the fundamental concept of showing and not telling in your writing. This is something that writers of all experience have to grapple with. It is not necessarily easy. You may discover that when you start out, you're not really clear on what constitutes telling rather than showing, or showing rather than telling, but you'll get it in time. Just remember that you want to bring in, the five senses, and that is how you are going to convey to the reader what it was like to actually be in the situation you were in. So we covered that, and we covered also the basics of dialogue, which is another a complex area of writing for most writers. So it takes some time to develop an ear for dialogue on the page. So don't be frustrated if that doesn't come immediately. You will get it. And then we also talked about point of view in essay, using the I and balancing telling about our experiences versus then reflecting on our experiences, which harkened back to part one, where we talked about, telling what happened and then telling why that mattered. So you have a really, really good basis for going into part 4, where we are going to talk about story structure. And then I'm going to send you off on your own to write your own adventure. And I hope that you will email me your stories and your thoughts about these, not just this workshop, but either of the other 2 workshops that you might have taken, the science fiction or the graphic novel writing. So let's head off to part 4 before we say goodbye, and get that under our belt as well.